all right. All right. Welcome, good people, to Beyond the Ballot, the left in a time of polycrisis. I'm so excited that we're here together. We're going to have a moment to think together and kind of, figure out some stuff about how we're going to move forward. There are a few things I want to take care of right off the bat. First of all, I want to thank some folks. Give a big shout out to Hammer and Hope. Come on, y'all. Yeah. You got a real, radical magazine journal, man. Got to show some love for that. By the way, we're going to have there's a Hammer and Hope, there's a Haymarket table in the back, and there's also a Debt Collective table in the back. So make sure y'all, And we're going to have, over there, and we'll have there's some signed books. So, we want to show that some love. Thank you to Haymarket Books, by the way. Come on. Yeah. Thank you to the Margaret Casey Foundation. Yeah. West 83rd for hosting us. And we also want to give some love to our ASL team, Kanara Price and Patrice Harrington. Now, one other piece of exciting news I have to share is that there's going to be a new issue of Hammer and Hope. Is going to be live on October 25th. So I know everybody's going to be clicking in, tuning in, downloading that. It's going to take a critical look at the U.S. election, uplifts important organizing campaigns across the U.S. and Latin America, and continues our commitment to covering Palestine. New material is going to be posted into early November. So it's going to be live on October 25th, but we're going to kind of keep going right up, through the election. So, look out for that as well. All right? And with that, I think we're going to get started. One last piece of business I just want to announce is we're going to talk for a while about some things, and then towards the end, we are going to have a Q&A, but you'll see folks are distributing cards, and they're going to distribute some cards out so you can write your questions down, and we'll take a look at those and have some questions toward the end. So that's how things are gonna roll. Next, let me introduce our guests. I think, we kind of know who's in the building, but out of respect, Naomi Klein is an award-winning journalist and New York Times best-selling author. She's a columnist with The Guardian. In 2018, she was named the inaugural Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair of Rutgers University, where we got to hang out, and is now honorary professor of media and climate at Rutgers. At UBC, yeah. In September 21st, she joined the University of British Columbia as UBC Professor of Climate Justice, tenured professor, co-director of the Center for Climate Justice. Her newest book is the New York Times bestseller, Doppelganger. Have y'all read that? Woo! Oh my God, mind-boggling. A Trip into the Mirror World, just published in paperback. The paperback is out now. Astra Taylor is a writer, filmmaker, and political organizer. Her books include the American Book Award winner, The People's Platform, Taking Back Power and Culture in the Digital Age, still so relevant, Remake the World, Essays, Reflections, Rebellions, The Age of Insecurity, Coming Together as Things Fall Apart, and with Leah Hunt Hendricks, Solidarity, that's the new joint. The Past, Present, and Future of a World-Changing Idea. She's a co-founder of the Debt Collective. All right, give it up for Astra. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor is the author of From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. You just got to give a shout out just for that book alone. Each of these books. And How We Get Free. Her book, Race for Profit, How Banks and the Real Estate Industry Undermine Black Home Ownership, was a semi-finalist for the National Book Award and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in History. She co-edited with Robin D.G. Kelley and Colin Kaepernick, Our History Has Always Been Contraband. Taylor is a contributing writer at The New Yorker and is Leon Forrest Professor of African American Studies at Princeton University. All right, give it up for Keeanga. My name is Chenjerai Kumanyika, and I'm a podcaster. I teach journalism in critical media studies at New York University. I am a co-host of Empire City. It's an untold story, origin story of the NYPD. Y'all should check that out. And I'm very honored to be here. Now let's get down to business. The title of our program reflects the understanding that as we build our movements, we have to set our horizons further than elections, right? And yet, it's clear that whatever is going to happen, the conditions are going to be shaped by this extremely contentious election. And so I want to start there for a minute. Both polling and anecdotal observations indicate that masses of people are really disappointed with these choices, right? I mean, on one hand, you have a straight up white supremacist. Even military leaders are saying this person is an outright fascist. But on the other hand, you have the other candidate, Harris, who's promising to maintain a lethal military and praises Dick Cheney for his service to the nation. These seem to be the options on the table. And of course, this is a context for, talking about building alternative parties. But what are you all seeing in terms of this election? Like, what are the most important things to pay attention to? What are you seeing about how people are feeling?
I'm making faces again. I'll start. I think there's a lot of things. I go back to the summer or the spring when there was something deeply demoralizing about what seemed like the slow death march of the cadaver in chief, Joe Biden, as the only alternative to Trump. I mean, it just felt like, wow, this is just gonna happen. And so, I think there was an initial burst of excitement around Harris by the simple virtue that she was alive, that she was breathing, that it seemed that she could actually respond.
That was the bar.
The bar is so low. But I think, one of the big questions over the last several weeks is what has happened to the sugar high that sort of captivated pundits and election observers, and really, a portion of the electorate over the final months of the summer. And I think that the decision of the Democratic Party consultants, of Kamala Harris, to run the campaign in such a way to appeal to the centrist voter has really deflated, I think, a lot of that enthusiasm. The quips about, she's a gun owner and she'll shoot somebody who comes into her house too, and the whole thing about the lethal military, and just all this kind of pandering to the right, I think has been somewhat demoralizing for people who were excited about an actual alternative to Trump. Now clearly, Harris is not running in the same way that Trump is, and doesn't represent the kind of same frontal assault on people that Trump does. But just in terms of how people are receiving this, and why there is, to some extent, an enthusiasm gap surrounding her campaign, I think that we have to look at the decision to run the race in this way, especially coming 4 years after the Democratic Party was sort of very open and conscious about aligning itself with the Black Lives Matter movement in a way to win the race. We can talk about the reasons for that, but there's such a sharp contrast that I think it has been politically deflating for some.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true. One of the things that's really stark to me is that we have these two very different relationships to reality, represented by the two campaigns, that are different kinds of flight into different kinds of fantasy. I was really struck by that during the conventions, where the Trump Vance convention was just amped up, sort of like the defiantly fake, right? Of reality television, of beauty pageants, of pro wrestling. Just like that we know it's fake, and that is a big part of the entertainment universe, right? Of just relishing the show of fakeness, right? We all are in on it. We know it's not real, but we're really enjoying turning it up to 11. And so it was all of that, and Stadium Rock, but then the DNC and the Harris campaign in general is like prestige TV, right? And it's kind of like Walsh sort of reminds you of Ted Lasso, or like and Harris is sort of playing like the lovable tough cop, or police chief on like every procedural that you've ever seen, right? And it's not like one is real and one is fake. It's they really do represent two different streams of sort of big entertainment in this country, and really the world. I mean, that said, I would be careful not to just feel smug of sort of like we of the left are the people in reality with real plans about how we're going to change things. I think it's a very tough moment to really hold reality, and we have our own versions on the left of fantasy, of imagining how we're going to change things with a big enough rally or the revolutionary moment just around the corner. There's different sort of narrative structures that we tend to ascribe to. So I do want to be careful, but that's what strikes me most, is just the kind of the slickness of the artifice. And I think they made a really kind of strange decision, just from an affect perspective, to go with joy in a moment like in a genocide, and also keep the genocide going. And as climate disasters wash away communities, I'm not saying there's no role for joy, but you kind of have to earn your joy a little bit. I mean, it has to be linked with some kind, it has to be tethered to a plan, to get out of the multiple kinds of rubble that we are in. I mean, I was struck, but there were a few days of news where it was like the cover of every newspaper was like, the top was rubble in Lebanon and the bottom was rubble in North Carolina. And it was just kind of like, this is just rubble world, right? And there's different, this is what capitalism and imperialism have produced. So to be running on joy in that moment without any kind of plan to get us out of the rubble is a sort of a wild marketing decision.
It was just vibes for so long, right? No policy, right?
But I think Keeanga is absolutely right, that I think that they fooled themselves because they mistook relief for joy, like just huge relief. Like we were like, and it did feel a little joyful for a minute, but that wasn't actual joy. That was just, okay, he's gone. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my personal feelings about this election are kind of resentful that it takes up so much of our attention, right? That it is this spectacle. And the fact is, you said these seem to be the two choices, and one of the two will win, right? Harris or Trump will win, because that's how our political system is structured. And ultimately, the election will be decided by 8 states out of 50. That's the reality. So sometimes I wonder why, when we're sitting in New York, are we thinking as much about this instead of using our energy putting our energy towards building things that we need as human beings, as organizers, regardless of who's going to be in office, right? I mean, we need infrastructure to push a Harris administration, or to protect ourselves under a Trump administration, to protect ourselves under a Harris administration too. But I think that is, that's the reality, that our electoral system is so fucked up that a small number of people are going to decide this. I happen to live in North Carolina right now, where the rubble is very real, and where my vote counts, more than it does in a lot of other places. So I'm feeling a sense that of frustration with how much energy the election sucks from tasks that might be a lot more, I think, important when we talk about life beyond November.
Absolutely. The only thing I'll add to this briefly is that for me, the election, I think, has so much power in shaping how we think about issues, right? Limiting it to sort of to the national sphere in a way, right? Narrating things around personalities, where we're invited to think that everything that's happening on the right is essentially all coming out of Trump's mind, as opposed to looking at the long strategy that the conservatives have rolled out, and other things. And so, it's like, even I think for leftists, right, and people, I just remember being involved in campaigns that were about, housing, right, trying to, stop evictions or whatever, all these other things. And then when the election cycle comes, everything gets funneled into that. And so, and by the way, that's one of the reasons why I'm so glad to have these folks, right, who can kind of help us to kind of think through. And on that note, I want to turn to kind of another question, which is, one thing I notice about all of our work, and probably we share this with folks in the room, as I see, our comrades in the room, is like, we're all news junkies. We sort of have to be, right? Just constantly paying attention to the news, right? And again, what I appreciate about my colleagues here is the way that in paying attention to the news, we can attend to some things that are like, sometimes like absurd, right? Because I mean, look, we're dealing with serious times, and I don't want to make light of that, but is this news cycle wild? I mean, some of the stuff that's going on, it's just like, I know that that's probably like every historical moment has that, but when I see some of the stuff like in North Carolina, and when I see, whether it's conspiracy theories, whether it's all kinds of, anything you might see on the internet, some of the talking points of the election, it's like, this is absurd, right? So one of the things I appreciate about my colleagues is your ability to kind of attend to those things, but to also do so in a way that still points us forward to something useful. So what have y'all noticed? Has anything caught y'all attention? I'm just curious, like, about, like in this moment, that you think is like an indicator in terms of current events?
They're all looking at me because they know that I've been digging into the hurricane conspiracy theories. I've become interested in conspiracy culture because I feel like it is sort of, it's a mirror, kind of a warped mirror, showing us needs that are going unfulfilled, right? And so I have done a deep dive into the various theories swirling around the hurricanes, and I mean, I don't call them theories because they're not coherent. Same with COVID. They are riding on a lot of the infrastructure, like informational infrastructure that was built for pandemic disinformation and misinformation about COVID health measures. Then when all the health measures were lifted, people were looking around going, oh, where are we going to get that kind of excitement and liftoff and sort of sense of like we're creating reality, for ourselves. And the disasters really are providing that. So it's not so much a theory, but if it were a theory, it would be, okay, climate change is a hoax that was dreamed up by the Davos elite in order to lock you in your home and make you eat bugs and use all of these this green tech that they're getting rich off of. the storms were created by Bill Gates, who also tried to track you with the vaccines.
He created the storms.
The weather is manipulated in order to hit red states that would vote for Trump. And the reason why they can't respond to it is because all the money has gone to migrants. And they also are not even trying to respond because they want these communities to drown so that they won't vote for Trump. But also they want the lithium in order to build the solar panels and the batteries, but not the Tesla batteries, because of course Elon Musk is one of the main spreaders of said conspiracies. So that's, an overview. But it's I mean, for me, as somebody, I wrote a book called The Shock Doctrine. It is about the reality that actually people do get taken advantage of by corporations and nefarious governments doing their dirty deeds in the aftermath of disasters. I mean, this is journalism that I have done, that many of us have done in the aftermath of Katrina, Hurricane Maria. So, I mean, really, it's weird to see a kind of a doppelganger version of the shock doctrine play out, but just made up, like out of thin air. But then the response from liberals is like, what are you talking about? That would never happen. And FEMA's great. FEMA's not great, I mean, and there is like, everything is perfect, right? And so then that just further fuels the conspiracy culture, right? And it's very sort of similar to, I think, the dynamic that a lot of us locked ourselves into during COVID, which was just reactive. So yeah, so I'm sort of paying attention to how that's playing out.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me not to want to. I'm living my
backyard.
Yeah, my parents.
Sorry,
my parents are in Asheville. My sister's in Asheville. My family's there. I'm there a whole lot, and it has other layers. Than the mayor of the mayor of Asheville is a Jewish woman.
I forgot the Jews. Also, it's the Jews.
Yeah. Asheville, North Carolina has had 3 Jewish mayors. It's very suspicious because of the Jewish lasers that control the weather. And so, to suppress the Republican vote, the mayor of Asheville seemed to have destroyed her own county, which is overwhelmingly liberal. But, it's just incredibly sad, right? Because the thing is, FEMA, however, flawed, is actually there. And these rumors, people are sort of lone actors are going around armed with weapons threatening FEMA officials, and then the FEMA officials leave. And so it does become this very distressing self-fulfilling prophecy where people then are denied that government assistance. So it is next level to have it so close to home, to have these kind of lies be peddled. I was thinking, as a kind of follow-up to yours, though, that there is the more respectable forms of conspiracy theories, the sort of more respectable lies. And we see a lot of these in right-wing litigation because, as we know, the conservative takeover of the courts has been going on for decades, but really did speed up under the last Trump administration when he appointed hundreds of district and circuit judges. This is something I've been watching more closely because of my work with the Debt Collective and our fight for student debt cancellation, which failed largely because of the Biden administration not following our advice and canceling debt automatically. But the right-wing lawsuits certainly played a role. So in the case of the litigation against student debt relief, for example, relief was struck down based on totally false claims that a loan servicer called Mohila, that you might know of if you have federal student loans. Who has Mohila? Yeah. So the idea that Mohila, which is tied to the state of Missouri, was being harmed, right? Because cancellation would mean that they would get less revenue and then they would actually not pay back a debt they owe the state of Missouri, regardless of the fact that they hadn't been paying it for years. This was completely baseless. This was completely false. So that kind of got us interested in this idea of like, wow, okay, there are a lot of lies and strange things happening in these court cases. And so the one I wanted to, you mentioned like current absurdities. So just remember Missouri there. The other day, a case was filed amending the litigation against abortion pills, right? Mifepristone. That case, we all celebrated because it didn't make it to SCOTUS, because they found out that the groups, they decided that the groups behind it didn't have legal standing. So 3 Republican-controlled states have become plaintiffs. One of them is Missouri, which is controlled by an all-Republican government, including a very wacky attorney general. And their claim essentially is that access to abortion pills harms the state of Missouri. And so I just want to read this because this is their argument. The remote dispensing of abortion drugs is depressing expected birth rates for teenage mothers. And this loss of potential population causes further injuries as well. The state's subsequent, quote, diminishment of political representation and loss of federal funds, such as potentially losing a seat in Congress and qualifying for less federal funding if their populations are smaller, will diminish the state's well-being. In other words, we need to ensure that teenagers are forced to have unwanted children so that the state of Missouri can have more people and get more Congress representatives and more revenue from the federal government. So these are the kinds of cases that are getting real traction. I mean, like 2 weeks ago, for example, student loan relief was blocked on the basis of something that hadn't actually happened yet. And they are conspiracy theories on some, I mean, they're not conspiracy theories, but they're absolutely fabricated arguments that are being heard by these MAGA judges who now have a shocking amount of power. But
wow. Okay, stuff in the news, not conspiracy theories. I am sort of curious. You can always tell it's election season because all of a sudden elected officials and people in the media are concerned about what Black people think. So I have been very interested about the coverage of Black voters. And there were 2 things that stood out. One was Obama. You know, there's Obama and Cousin Pookie has reappeared on the scene. So Obama, I think a week ago, was chastising Black men for not falling in line with Kamala Harris. And one of the interesting things I thought about in regards to that was at the DNC, Obama gave a speech which kind of tied together with the theme that several other kind of high-profile speakers made, which seemed to be a really trying to make amends for the kind of overreaction to Trump voters in earlier elections. So Hillary Clinton, really going back to Hillary Clinton referring to Trump voters as a basket full of deplorables or something. And so Obama, and in this sort of shift to we want to reach out to these, some of these people, talked about the need to be patient and, you know, to listen to people, to not make judgments about people. And then in the last week, essentially dismissed the concerns of, you know, a small contingent of voters as sexist. And so what I thought was interesting about this was I looked at this very extensive poll of who Black voters are today, basically. And one of the things that was pointed out was that 15% of Black voters who describe themselves as Republicans, so this is basically men and women, make between $25,000 and $50,000 a year. And I thought within that context that I'm sure there's sexism that is a part of the mix in terms of the complaints about Kamala Harris, but I also thought about, what some of her rollout has been over the last week or so to appeal to Black male voters in the first place. And it's more regulations of cryptocurrency. It's investment and mentor programs. It's $20,000 entrepreneurial loans that are forgivable, and specifically, they want to create pathways into the cannabis industry. That's it. So, and then there's the broader thing about the $25,000 for homeowners, but most Black people are renters, so on and so forth. So I thought that this really kind of got to one of the issues that the campaign is having. Black men have been a particular focus, I think, because Kamala Harris is a Black woman, but she is off by 10% with Black women voters compared to those who voted for Biden in 2020, off by 22% of voters 18 to 29 compared to who voted for Biden in 2020. And I think across the board, there are deficits in comparison to where Biden was at. And so for me, that this raised a question, not just about the strategies of Harris and the Democratic Party, but it did raise questions about what we're talking about, what kind of politics and movement can we envision that captures the attention, the participation of people who feel completely alienated by this particular party, who are Black, who are white, who are Latino, who feel alienated. And that is one of the questions that I come back to when thinking about what does it mean to be politically active beyond this campaign season, and what needs to happen to actually engage people so that the politics don't just rise and fall with each presidential election or congressional election, but how do we build something that is not just tied to the electoral cycle? I think is a question beyond the ballot that we are trying to grapple with.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Oh, I just wanted to say there will be a great essay in the new issue of Hammer and Hope about this opportunity agenda for Black men called Black Men Don't Need Opportunity, They Need Abolition. So, what would?
I have not yet read that essay, and I really appreciate this insight, but I do want to take issue with one thing you said. Studying the Black radical tradition, one demand stands out, it just shines out, crypto, right? When it's clear. And so I don't know what you've been reading, but on a serious note, I really appreciate this analysis, and I would say, I think it was a missed opportunity, because what happens is Obama sort of rolls out with I saw one commentator referred to as the brothers smackdown, and he's like, hey brothers, let's, I think he said something like, the choice is clear, it's between someone who comes from where you come from, and he did that sort of shtick. And then the pushback to that was people saying, well, Black men are not the problem here, right? And that's fine. But the problem is there is a real issue, I think, with men, and I'm just going to say with men. I'm not even going to say like working class men. I know, and as a man, I've been talking to men, there's an issue, right? There's a kind of, I would even say there's all these portals into fascism, right? The podcasts, right? Like when I talk to a lot of men who listen to a podcast, as a podcaster, it's like, they say, yo, you gotta listen to this podcast. That's the worst thing you want to say as a podcaster, right? You know what I'm saying? So there's an opportunity when you're trying to grapple with that to really sort of say, what has actually produced this? What role actually did Democrats play over all these years through multiple administrations, alienating folks? What are the larger trends, right? There's a real conversation, to have a real conversation about what this problem is, rather than some kind of crude sort of appeal to the, like, oh, it's just misogyny, right? So anyway, I think, but I want to turn to something even a little bit more serious, and I want to just proceed carefully here. Especially I think, the last year, with everything that's been going on, particularly with what's happening in Palestine, these have been really contentious times, I think, in left politics, and we wanted to have a moment to talk a little bit about our culture and how we deal with each other through disagreement. And I just want to be really present. I don't want to get all too woo-woo here, but I do want to kind of be present because, listen, the emotions that people have experienced, I think, are totally justified. Like if you're not experiencing outrage, right? So I never want to sound like I'm policing someone's rage. I never want to sound like I think everybody's on the same page here that accountability has to be a part of our movements, right? So we don't want to police people for that. And yet, we're trying to, when we talk about beyond the ballot, we're talking about how do we proceed forward in a way where we actually build through those things. So I wanted to start out by talking about something that I have not heard a lot in my journey in political education on the left, which is how people change their minds, right? I'm going to start there for a minute. And I'm going to give one example of a time when I had a disagreement with colleagues and had to change my mind. And I'll invite my sort of colleagues here to have this. It was. I'll do it briefly because I'm sort of embarrassed to share this. You all are gonna be like, really, Chen? You had to learn that? But I'm gonna come out and do it. I was at Rutgers University, and we were dealing with multiple crises in the university. Right? It was like one of the biggest crises, obviously, is like the way that contingent and adjunct faculty are treated. Right? There's all this workload that they have. They're actually making the university run horrible working conditions. I'm just going to say most of the tenured faculty not standing up for them in the way they're supposed to. So we were dealing with that on the one hand. We were dealing with, the various issues with, all kinds of issues to do with race and gender sort of disparities and things like that. We were dealing with the way that the university was expanding into places in New Jersey, right, and displacing people, right? And we were also dealing with, during the pandemic, for example, Rutgers had all these reserves, right, that they're supposed to use for an emergency. And instead of using those reserves, they were choosing to just lay people off, right, at this horrible time. So to me, I was like, look, let's turn up. Let's labor stoppage. Let's go on strike. Let's do this, as an untenured professor, right? What are we waiting for? And I kind of became impatient, and I went to some of the senior colleagues in our union, and I was like, yo, let's do this, man. Stop working. And they looked at me and they were like, Chenjerai, I feel you. But if we're serious about having a real labor stoppage that has impact and is not simply performative, we might get to that in 9 months. The first thing we have to do is go to each department, see who's with us, make the case. We have to start recruiting. We have to actually get to see if you can get people to wear a t-shirt, fill a survey out. Because if they're not wearing a t-shirt, they're not going to stop labor in any meaningful way. So it's not that there's not steps we can take, but we're not getting to labor stoppage tomorrow or next week. And it was a profound, and not just to hear them say that, but then to actually watch that process occur twice, actually, since that conversation, right? Folks go through that, and achieve victories, that were, it was very contentious. So that was a time when I learned. And, I feel like that particular thing about our timelines is one of the things that's on the table. But yeah, anybody have another experience they're willing to share?
I mean, I think I just love your story so much because it's true, right? These are structure tests. Can you get someone to do something small? Get a group of people to do something small before you make the big move. So I think that is such an important lesson. I hope we all learn it. I guess inspired by your kind of introduction, I think for me, even realizing how important, so not just having a plan, okay, first we're gonna fill the form out, and then we're gonna sign the petition, and then we're gonna wear the t-shirt, and then we're gonna, escalate our asks. I mean, having a strategy and a plan is so critical. But I think a huge shift for me, and I would say it was changing my mind because I think I would have kind of revolted against this idea, is just how important attending to people's emotions is actually. So when you're talking about the emotional weight of the last year, I mean, I think organizing is just way more about feelings than I thought. I think I was the kind of person who was like, you make the right arguments, you have the facts, you tell people the truth, that's how it happens. Dream on. I mean, I was in Washington Square Park yesterday, and there were these people, I felt such kinship with them. They had their anonymous masks on. They were standing in a circle showing footage of animals being slaughtered, right? Just like really displaying this faith, like people will see this truth, they will change, they will join our movement. And I think, we laughed at that idea, but I think the left betrays that idea a lot. I mean, I think the left betrays a faith in this idea that if we can just argue with folks and argue them into our position, that we're actually right, that we do that a lot. And so my last two books, I think, have tried to talk more about the emotional life of politics and how, for example, in the age of insecurity, how the right is exploiting people's insecurity, perpetuating it. It's what I call manufactured insecurity, in order to benefit from that fear, to capitalize on it. And I think we need to be a lot more astute about emotions, and that means like not just shaming people, not moralizing in a way that turns folks off, and being more in tune with ourselves too. I mean, the other night it turned out that I really cared about this bowl because my husband broke it, and then I got really mad. And I was like, that was my bowl, and you broke it. And I got really pissed off. I didn't know I liked this bowl so much. It was literally just a bowl. And, he's more EQ than me. So he was like, why are you getting so mad? Like, what are you sad about, right? And I was so sad because my town, my town is like a fucking, this hurricane. Sorry. And like, my mom had called just like weeping. And I had watched, for some reason all day, I had watched Shaban al-Dasu, the 19-year-old kid from Gaza. And I was just like, decided it was, my unconscious was like, it'd be easier to yell about the stupid bowl than cry on stage in front of people,
Astra.
And so we're, on the left we say, don't mourn, organize, right? And there's truth to that because self-care isn't gonna do it for us. Crying in my husband's arms isn't gonna do it. We do need to organize, and organize is an amazing form of solace and community, but we also do need to mourn. So, I've been saying lately, we need to morganize, right? We need to be able to hold these feelings together and make our movements welcoming to people in their emotions, their feelings, and their complexity. I mean, the last thing I want to say is I gave a talk about solidarity in Toronto the other day. And afterwards, these 20-year-old kids came up to me and they were asking about how to organize and asking me about solidarity. And one of them, this maybe 22, 23, she said, it's really hard because my generation is so mean to each other. We're so mean to people who have made mistakes. And I just looked at her and I said, well, what did you do? And she said, my family was Zionist. And to me, I just was like, you didn't make a mistake. You are now organizing for liberation in Palestine, right? Like you know, this isn't something that you should feel ashamed of or bad about. You actually have this amazing gift now, this capacity to talk to folks who still agree with that perspective and to bring them on this journey and to help open their minds. And a left that makes people feel ashamed for worldviews they were born into is never going to get anywhere. We're going to get smaller and smaller, and we're going to be, you know, letting all of our frustration and pain about the world come out sideways instead of channeling it into solidarity and power and the strategy we need. And so I have a lot of big feelings about this moment, and that's okay, as long as I use them, you know, I think to come together with other people and organize. But that is, we do have to be nicer to each other. And a few years ago, I would have thought that was such a soft, lame thing to say.
Yeah, I find myself playing that role a lot as a movement elder now. It's just like, yeah, I was just at Brown and yesterday, and I built this beautiful sukkah, and you know, all the universities have banned anything like an encampment, but maybe there, you know, it's a religious observance, a sukkah. It's a temporary structure. Of course, they've destroyed them, I believe, at Columbia and Northwestern, but Brown, it's still up, the Liberation Sukkah. And so we were, you know, a bunch of us were sitting in there last night, and I said that, like, it was my final message. It's just, I've just been really struck also that that a lot of people are, you know, a lot that it's that for a lot of people the movement is their family now, right? And so there's a particular kind of pain when that family, doesn't have grace for one another. Thank you so much for sharing that, Astra. It was so powerful. And it really made me think a lot about how we need to have crying parties. But seriously, I do think we need, I had the opportunity recently to talk to the artist, Anoni and the Johnsons. And Anoni sings about different kinds of grief and loss, and climate grief and transphobia and being a scapegoat. And she said something, she was talking about the death of the coral. And she said, we need ceremony fit for purpose, which is just like almost containers to sort of hold the enormity of the times we're living in. And we don't really have that. We don't have places where, like, really capable. So, you know, I think when we don't have containers, ways to express this, it comes out in different ways. Like, yeah, okay, so you gave a benign story about the bull, but there's all kinds of other ways. And I also think that we need to, you know, have space for legitimate rage, including at each other, right? It's not all just about nicey nice, because rage is one of the emotions that we are holding and contending with, and it's legitimate too. You asked about changing our views. I mean, when I have found, we are in, we're making these references to universities, and they're not. It's not funny, the repression that is going on against students and faculty and speech. And I do believe that this needs to be understood as a new McCarthyism. It's extremely serious, and we're seeing a detonation of the entire international humanitarian law architecture. I mean, a lot is going down in this moment, but basic principles around academic freedom and speech in general, and the right to protest, they're all on the line. And so I have interrogated my own sort of, I think, casualness about some of these rights, and I don't want to get into a whole long, tedious debate about cancel culture, but I'm not willing to just shrug it off and say it never was a thing, because there has been a lot of canceling events and refusing to read texts and things where people don't meet a certain standard, and a use of language of sort of that someone's speech is an act of violence. Somebody is making us feel harmed, unsafe. And I think that there are situations where that language deserves to be used, but I think it's been overused. And I think there's been, I have been silent in, when I've had my own questions around, should we really try to all organize to get the speaker canceled or, not speaking on campus? I think when we're battling a very, very well-oiled, well-financed information machine when we're talking about Palestine, and I believe that these are winnable battles, but we need some clear messages on it. And I think that there's been a lot of mixed messages on speech, and that is making it harder for us to fight these attacks on the right to freedom of speech, because the left, frankly, I think hasn't defended speech, including speech that we disagree with. I've been trying to figure out how to talk about this more openly, and I think the information war is so unbalanced that it requires, even though we can all understand the nuances, I'm not sure that the debate can hold that much nuance. I think it needs to be a little bit clearer and accessible. And, that's where some of these sort of straight up pro-free speech positions can come in pretty handy, even though they are often problematic. They're legible to a lot of people. And I think we need to think more about that when we're thinking about how we win, is how many footnotes are there in our argument? And if there's too many, we might not win, because we're not going to have that space to lay it all out. And then people, if there's a sort of an obvious hypocrisy to point to, people will just use that as an excuse not to listen. I see that happening on a lot of different fronts.
So I was thinking about this, just listening to Astra and Naomi, and I've been wrong about a million things, but what I'm interested in is how these two things that Astra and Naomi are talking about overlap, meaning that one of the things I'm very interested in is how do we create a left culture that is open and capacious enough to include people who feel alienated, angry, and want things to change, and are confounded by what is on offer to do that. And part of that, I think, means creating a political culture that can talk about that. And I don't know. Maybe it happens in some places. It doesn't happen in others. But I think that for me, what that looks like is a tolerance for political disagreement and debate that can be contentious. I think that there is something about I've been an activist, organizer type for, really since I was in high school. And one of the features of the left that I miss, actually, that doesn't maybe it exists somewhere here or there, but I was very active in the 2003 war, the U.S. war against Iraq, and we started organizing against that war before it began, shortly after the September 11th attacks in 2001. And then organizing meant that you put up flyers all over the city, that you sat in rooms that were much bigger than this one, and that you argued and you debated with people. And, and it wasn't a big friendship circle, at all. These were very heated, contentious political arguments and debates. And then we took votes on things, and that determined what we did. But there was something about having to be in a room together, that being physically present with people, and voting, that you had to actually argue for the sake of convincing people about something, that you had to actually try to persuade the room in order to move from point A to point B. And so it's not to romanticize that, because life doesn't stand still, the world doesn't stand still, and things change. But that there is something about our political culture now that has made it difficult to communicate effectively with each other, that I think is a hindrance, not just for the people who are in the Zoom space or wherever they may be, but also in terms of getting larger. And I think that has shrunk our horizons and sense of what needs to happen, meaning we have to build mass movements. We have to build mass movements, not movements of the already committed, not movements of my friends, not movements of the people who already agree. In order to actually have the political weight, power, and authority to force whomever it is in power, Trump, Harris, whoever it is, because Trump may lose, Harris may win, but has conceded so much and has conducted this campaign on the terms of the right that who the hell even knows what that will mean for us, losing by winning. And so if we don't actually have a mass movement that can force whomever is in power to concede to what people actually want. One of the crazy things when I was writing about this campaign, and it's an article
For Hammer and Hope.
Why is this race so close? And if you look at the polls, like, most people in this country think that the government should be involved in making sure everyone has health care. Most people want the government to spend. Most people are actually for big, active government, making people's lives better. They learned something from the role of the state in the pandemic. And if you're for that, there's no actual representation of that in that is on offer in this electoral process. And so in order to get those who are in power to respond to what it is that most people actually want, most people have to be organized. And it feels like we are so far behind on doing that. And all these people are, oh, November 6th, we're going to be there. We just saw this with with Biden, how the energy that was generated through the historically large protest in the summer of 2020 was channeled essentially into Biden's 2020 election and then the Georgia Senate races in December. And it was dissipated. And there actually were no protests, even as Biden was abandoning the promises that were made in 2020. No protest. It was only the Palestine protest this past spring that broke through the malaise. And so that just means that our social forces, like the sentiment is there, I believe. I think all the excitement when Kamala Harris first declared her candidacy that was expressed in tens of thousands of people getting on these ridiculous phone calls and showing up to the stadiums. This was, people wanted to do something. To me, this was an expression of a sentiment of wanting to be organized and wanting to do something. And we have a left in this country that I certainly see myself as a part of, that has not been up to the challenge of organizing that. And that's the challenge we face. That's what we have to do. If we want to actually build beyond ourselves.
Wow, that was bars, as the young folks say. So I'm gonna add this one more question I think we have to deal with at least briefly, and then I would like to open it up and see what comes into our Q&A. But just because of the sort of experiences that we have here, you know, there's a tendency to sometimes feel like we're starting from scratch with this, right? What are we gonna do? What is to be done, right? But the truth is actually that, you know, the work I've learned from, you know, my colleague, one of the things I really appreciate about the work of everybody who's sitting here with me is that constantly in their work, while offering really insightful and, you know, fierce critiques of the status quo, they also pointing out those moments that this is not all doom and gloom. There are movements that have had victories, and then even there are inspiring things we can learn and practical things we can learn even when there's something that we don't want to narrate as a victory. So, you know, Astra, you know, just looking at the work with Debt Collective, for example. I mean, I watched that work through multiple administrations, right? Bringing in people who were sort of, we don't like the term unorganized. We're not condescending to people like that, but you know what I'm saying? Like bringing people who didn't have these kinds of experiences of organizing in across ethnicity, across all these differences. And keeping this movement alive and engaging with the electoral realm. Naomi, I remember you talking about, you know, pointing our attention to things that were going on in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, you know, and some of the things people were doing, you know, these sort of, you know, things that were on the table that people were forging, different visions. And of course, you know, Keeanga, I mean, you know, I know so much, probably everybody in this room is a student of your work on different parts of the Black liberation struggle. And so I just want to invite you all to weigh in, you know, again, I want to invite our audience in a little bit, but what are some lessons we can learn about when we're thinking beyond the ballot, when we're thinking about what it means to nurture and build a movement, right? Between, across these elections, set the revolutionary horizon stronger, you know, what are some lessons you've learned from those experiences?
Okay, me. I mean, I think the question picks up really well where Keeanga left off, which is, okay, we agree, it feels like, that we need to get fucking organized at scale to build the power we want to transform our political conditions. And I mean, I think one tension is just one of timescales, right? The urgency of the now, the urgency of a genocide, the urgency of the climate crisis. And we have to be responsive in that. But we do actually have to think really long term. I think beyond the next administration, like a decades long, maybe generational long political transformation. Like, what does it really fucking take to move these entrenched power structures? Last night, I did an event where I moderated a conversation with Chris Smalls, who helped start up the Amazon labor union, right? They have not taken down and nationalized Amazon, but they did do something tremendous. They unionized the JFK 8 Staten Island warehouse, right? They were out there in a tent, outside the warehouse for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of days. My friends who made a film called Union that's just opening filmed for 300 of those days. Not every day they were out there. And they were out there talking to coworkers, being kind and welcoming, right? Again, this isn't just about being nice. Niceness is a strategy on some level. We do need to, it's also strategic to debate and have conflict and know how to have that, but it is also strategic to say, hey, how was your day? Or I remember it's your birthday. This is what they would do out there, was celebrate folks, give them a bit of a feeling of emotional connection. And that's what it takes to unionize one warehouse. And they're lucky that they pulled it off. So I think we just really have to be serious about what kind of, what Ella Baker called spade work, like what that day-to-day work of organizing is. The Debt Collective is an experimental union of debtors, and our idea is, no one strategy is it. Nobody has the silver bullet. But we are very inspired by labor movement organizing, by organizing at the point of production. Labor density in this country is 10%, and a lot of us, because of how labor law is structured or because we're freelancers or whatever, do not have the chance to join a labor union. But we're still in this economy, and we're probably indebted. As the Debt Collective says, you're not in debt because you live beyond your means, but because you're denied the means to live, because you don't have universal health care, you don't have free public education, because you're underpaid at the job. So guess what? You get robbed by your boss, and then you get robbed by creditors who you borrow from, right? So it is a short skip and a jump from feeling the pain of your student loans, your medical bills, your credit card debt, to being like, the state owes me more, right? And so that's kind of the big picture theory, is that within this movement, we can see different horizons. The horizons of the sort of immediate horizon of, well, let's get some debt canceled, and the longer term horizon of, let's build a society with reparative public goods where people actually get the things that they deserve. When we started off, we're kind of have our origins in Occupy Wall Street. When we decided to start with student debt. When we raised the demand, cancel student debt, free college, Reuters, NPR, we keep all the clips, said, can you believe these idiots at Occupy? They think the government's going to cancel student debt. And guess what? They want free college too, right? We were mocked. And by the end of the Obama administration, we had launched the world's first student debt strike, organizing with students from a predatory for-profit college. And we had created such a crisis that the Obama administration was starting to cancel debts for people who had gone to this predatory college, Corinthian. And we had to use every kind of power at our disposal. We did what we call economic disobedience. We cannot pay these debts, we won't pay. But we also looked at political power, and we got a bunch of attorneys general to sign on and support the cause. We tried to shift the narrative by engaging with media. We weren't doing podcasts at the time. It was like 2014, but we did other things. Legal power. What were the rights people actually fucking had? So we looked and we found this obscure provision from a reauthorization of the Higher Education Act from the 90s, and we're like, wow, hold on, they're legally entitled to relief. So, we have to be, I'm just saying, like, leverage comes in all of these different forms, and we have to be, improvisational, and when we're trying to figure out what power we possess. When the Trump administration hit, we hit a wall. It was a really tough time because we're unique in that, I think our campaign at that point was uniquely focused on the federal government because student loans are held overwhelmingly by the federal government. We did manage to force Betsy DeVos to do one tranche of debt relief, and she signed the papers with extreme displeasure. Betsy DeVos was Trump's Secretary of Education. In 2022, our demand was finally met, and the Biden administration canceled $6 billion of debt for 640,000 Corinthian students, which was the original demand of our strike. And we had, at that point, pushed the administration to make this bolder promise of debt cancellation. And so my point is that, I guess because we're thinking about the election, is that, the political terrain for us, it did really matter whether there was a Democratic administration or a Republican administration. But that ultimately, our leverage came in a lot of different forms, and it's about being organized enough to try to access those. And I think having that longer horizon, well, what are we building power for? It's not just for this, crumb of debt relief, but ultimately because we're trying to get people organized around their shared collective interests. We're trying to get people to see themselves and each other differently. And this work has been personally really humbling for me. Like, I find it a lot easier to write books than to be part of a movement and to do this stuff day after day. I mean, I think we really, it is something that is very demanding, and more people need to do it. And there's, plenty of rewards and great parts that come along with organizing, but it's no fucking joke. Like, our organizing director, Julie, is actually back there. The work of holding people together is real work. It's really important work. And it is a skill I think more of us really need to cultivate.
I'll just say quickly that, sometimes organizing looks like going somewhere several hundred days, but sometimes, things happen very quickly. And, I remember whether it was the kind of first iteration with Black Lives Matter in 2014, where things, it felt like months were happening in a matter of days. And I think there was the same effect in 2020, where things were happening very rapidly and quickly, so much so that I spent all of 2021 thinking it was 2020. And so, that's to say that there's no kind of set formula or pattern. There are long-term struggles, there are short things that come up very quickly. I think the question is, how do we organize ourselves to deal with different kinds of situations as they arise? And then how do you get people to then see themselves as organizers wherever they are? Where, if you're a student, if you are at work, whatever your capacity is, where it's not just you go off to organize someone else or to go off to organize somewhere else, but how does one see, how do you organize right where you're at? And what kind of relationships are you building with people? And what is that connected to? And how do you expand that? And so there's different ways to think about it. The issue is, how do we plug in to connect with what is either happening, or to, be involved with something that is happening?
I think I find myself really thinking about how we weave our movements together, and how we kind of tell a shared story where because I think the work, there's so many incredible organizers on the stage, in this room. I want to sort of acknowledge the sort of just the exhaustion of having, I know that there are people here who have just been on the streets calling for ceasefire, for liberation for Palestine and justice for more than a year now, have pulled off absolutely incredible actions, historic actions. And I feel, I also want to acknowledge that there's like a fear, I hear from Palestinian friends of mine that is just like, well, is it going to be another one of these mass movements that people move on from, right? Because that has happened, right, with other movements, including, the movement for Black Lives that Keeanga has been talking about. It's not like movements never die, right? Like things happen, things change, and they inform the next movement, right? The Bernie campaign wouldn't have happened without Occupy. Occupy wouldn't have happened without the ultra-globalization movement. And I think that the connections that are being made in the movement for Palestinian liberation are intensely informed by BLM, by indigenous rights organizing here. And there's a generation that understands what genocide is because they have learned about genocide here. And are connecting the dots in ways that their Holocaust education discouraged them from connecting those dots, right? But I think the precariousness is we are still in this weird sort of NGO structure, right? Of kind of like issue by issue. Even if we have a holistic analysis of capitalism, we don't have the container for it, right? And I'm sure there are people who are part of parties out in the room who feel like, well, what about this? Why aren't you talking about it? We're trying to do that, and more power to you. I don't want to be dismissive of it. I do think we have to be careful of sectarianism for the same reasons we've been talking about, because that can lead us to a road of just denunciation. And if you're not doing my particular thing, you're a complete sellout and a jerk. We've all heard that, right? But yeah, I find myself really thinking about, what, like this economic system is, like we've said it before, we've been saying it for years, it is at war with life on Earth. And the death toll is getting higher and higher and higher. And that is why Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, says that he sees the future of the entire world's poor in Gaza, that this is about normalizing mass death. And if we want to understand why the governments of the colonial and settler colonial states have lined up across party lines to defend Israel's Iron Dome, it's because the Iron Dome is global. We're in one, right? And I think we need that the real challenge is, what's the alternative to that? Like, what is the alternative? What is the society based on life, repair, right? Because we are in the rubble. We're not talking about a clean sheet. We are rebuilding in the rubble. And there's, more people who are going to be living on less land because we've made large parts of the planet uninhabitable, or some people have. And I think people are reaching towards those connections. I want to shout out the JVP crew who shut down Wall Street and said, and shouted, fun climate, not genocide, So like these connections are emerging in the streets, and people are making them, and it comes out of years of organizing, but it can't just be that flash in the pan, right? It can't just be spontaneous. We really need the glue that holds us together. And I also just want to shout out Hammer and Hope, because this is a great example of the kind of intellectual debate space that we need, where we work out ideas, right? And have something tangible. So yeah, thanks.
Absolutely. Couple things. One is I want to, speaking of which, I mentioned that Rutgers example yesterday. I just got to shout out my comrade, Sherry Wolf, who was one of the key organizers with Rutgers, is there. She's someone. And I want to say, to Naomi's last point about, not sleeping, one of the things we're going to be talking about in the upcoming Hammer and Hope issue is this moment when SNCC, some members of SNCC made a turn on the issue of Palestine. And the thing that inspired it was that Ethel Miner, who was the communications director, started a reading group. Kwame Ture said it was the reading group that changed it, because they read, first they read Herzl and Ben Gurion, then they read anti-Zionist Jewish authors making the case and Palestinian authors. And he said when they got to the readings about South Africa and the relationship between Israel and South Africa, Stokely Carmichael said Kwame Ture said it was quite a shock, because before that he had been sort of championing Zionism. So it was the reading group. They met once a week and once a month, and they discussed readings. And this led to a profound shift in the Black Power movement. So just want to say that. Haymarket, you know what I'm saying? We got the book table, study groups. Come on, y'all. Hammer and Hope coming out, you know what I mean? But I'm gonna gather a few questions here together. One question that we've kind of already been talking about, and I'm sorry I won't get to all these questions, but I'm gonna keep all these questions and think about ways that we might address them. One question is this. I'm gonna read two questions that are sort of in the same ballpark. Can you speak to the way Palestine has shaped this moment for the left? How does imperialism and international solidarity shape our tasks? So that's one question. And here's a related one. Can the panel speak to the emerging awareness of colonialism and neo-colonialism in this moment? Because it strikes me that the struggle in the US today is about a skewed understanding of world history, current systems of power, etc. So, those two things seem linked. Is there anything that folks want to say? And I'm going to address one other trend of questions on those issues, but thanks, folks.
I'll just say that one thing about the Palestine movement that I think is really important that, may get overlooked because of the relentlessness of the Israeli state is what a breakthrough the movement has had in changing public consciousness and understanding. And that, I don't think that should be taken lightly. I mean, I started organizing around Palestine in earnest, really, in 2001. And the level of participation and support that we see, today is just not on the same scale. And I think that the kind of repressive response of the American state, of the administrative bodies on various campuses, of all of that has really distorted what can be found in successive polls that look at what the general public of this country in particular think about it. The US's role in financing and arming the state of Israel is deeply unpopular. The people, there are majorities that want an end to the US involvement. They want an end to Israel's siege. They want an end to what is happening. And that idea is both, I think, a product of the kind of endless, dedicated activism around this political issue, and that it's distorted because it's out of sync with the political class, with the mainstream media. And so it makes it feel like our movement is marginalized. It makes it feel like, oh, we're the lunatics who are talking about Palestine. When in fact, the movement has transformed public opinion around this issue. And so I think that the problem with not seeing that is that then sometimes we feel like a small, embattled, marginalized movement, instead of a movement that actually has massive support, and that has actually transformed how ordinary people view this across the country. So I think it's an important thing to take stock of.
I mean, I guess I agree. I don't know. My thought is, I guess I would like to see our conception of internationalism not like, it does need to be outer focus. That's the whole point of it. But to actually see how it impacts people here as well, because I am kind of the conviction that tapping into self-interest is a good thing for organizing, and it's part of what motivates people, which is, part of why I thought that JVP action was so powerful, Naomi, to be at Wall Street and to say, fund climate, right? Not genocide. Debt Collective had an action in May that was called Fund Education, Not Genocide. And we went to Washington, D.C. and did civil disobedience at the Capitol, calling for debt relief and free education, and trying to, partly to show that there actually are real connections here, right? When we talk about sending money for arms to Israel, that's real, right? That's not just a talking point. And I think there is something powerful about making those connections, more visible to people as we organize with them, and to get people to think about the provocation from Coretta Scott King, who said, we haven't yet taken seriously the challenge of a peacetime economy, right? Like, that is, what would it be like to have a society where the welfare state and the warfare state were not so interlinked, to build a society really based on peace? Because I think, to me, that's what a peace movement would actually be about. It wouldn't just be the absence of violence, the absence of killing, but the presence of all the things we need to sustain life. And I feel like people, as you're saying, the polling is there, right? But we need to persuade people that we have, that we actually have power together to help create that different world.
Okay, cool. Yeah. All right. So we're gonna take this one question, and we're gonna, and then we're gonna sort of wrap up. How can the left in America bring more working class poor people in? With 62% of Americans considered working class, why does the demographic feel alienated by the left? I think that's really interesting. Similarly, here another question: how do we build cross-class solidarity with our middle and upper class loved ones? Who, I'm having trouble reading here, but everything is terrible, etc. But these questions in general seem to be trying to think about how we bring more people into the movement. And I think it's a real question that connects earlier to what we were saying too, like, how do we organize with people who may think very differently about things? So to build that coercive power.
Yeah, so we need more entry points. I used to, I think about this a lot in 2014, 2015, 2020, around Black Lives Matter, is that we had massive mobilizations constantly, but very few entry points, meaning that if you wanted to do something more than just go to a protest, where do you go? How do you connect? How do you plug into things? And to me, that's related to what I spoke about earlier in terms of political culture, that we need meetings. We need meetings that bring people together to talk about the most important political issues of the day, to have opinions about them, to think about them, that aren't just, on college campuses, that aren't just reserved for kinds of expertise, but that is really about developing a political culture. So, I think we need a shift in political culture, but that we also have to build organizations that have entry points, that aren't just foundation-funded NGO things with, the paid staffers and the professionalization of activism. And, it's not disparaging people who do that, but that's not a grassroots organization. That's not an organization in which everyone has a kind of democratic input and control over. And those are the kinds of organizations that we actually need to build, where people learn about how to organize themselves and to have ownership of the politics and have ownership of the agenda and have ownership of the organization itself. So there are lots of ways, I think, that that break down this wall around politics, that's something that other people do, that's something that is a kind of professionalized thing that the quote unquote or hashtag activists do. And so, those are at least some of the things that I think need to happen in the left's culture to open up the space for people to think about politics, to talk about politics, and then to act on them.
I was struck when Astra was talking earlier about, and Chenjerai, when you were talking about how incredible the Debt Collective has been in this period, even at times when a lot of organizations were really in a lull, including in the pandemic, right? And I was thinking about why that is. And I mean, I've been very involved in the climate justice movement, and I don't want to disparage it. I love that movement, and it's urgent, and I think we should all be really invested in its revitalization. But it's another one of those movements that had like a super mass moment in 2019. Massive strikes, millions of people around the world. Where is it now, right? And it hasn't done well weathering the intensifications of the of just the this sort of necropolitics that we're discussing. Don't use the word necropolitics if you want to reach mass numbers of people. I've been spending too much time at university. Speak in the vernacular, said Mike Davis. Anything that's worth saying is worth saying clearly. By the way, I'm new to the Academy. I've only been sort of doing this thing for a few years, and I really, truly am struck by the fact that there is a whole world of making simple things complicated. Like, it is wild. Like, it's like translation from things that we all understand to things that 10 people understand. And yeah, that should not be a thing. I'm all for funding education, but... yeah. But back to the climate justice movement, I think that it hasn't been able to weather the daily blows of COVID, inflation, just the economic immiseration of this period, and the urgency of stopping a genocide. I mean, there are so many people. I went to the JVP retreat a few months ago, sort of staff and chapter leaders, a few hundred wonderful, incredible organizers, and the Venn diagram between that group of people and Sunrise was a circle. And so. This is why we need that sort of meta story, because it's all important. And, we get into this mindset of like, okay, we're going to put that aside because there's an emergency over here. The emergency is rolling. We're in a rolling emergency. And so we need to be able to connect the dots. But I think from a climate perspective, if we want to be building a working class movement, it can't be abstract, right? And there's a way, sometimes we talk about part of the Climate and Community Institute. They do fantastic work, and they talk about fighting for climate policies that we can touch and feel, right? And I think the work that you do with the debt collectives, that is policy people can touch and feel. If you win, it materially improves people's lives. If you fight an eviction, it materially improves people's lives, right? And tenant unions have also been really resilient and growing in this same period. So I think from a climate perspective, we should be fighting for free transit. I think we'll have a working class movement if we're fighting for free transit. If we're fighting for lowering the rent and lowering the temperatures at the same time. It's not a mystery. Like it's really obvious. Actually, there are all kinds of policies that materially improve people's economic circumstances and lower carbon emissions. It's just they haven't been prioritized. So we have to prioritize them, or we're going to just lose. Yeah.
Well, I
And on
think,
that happy note.
but when you do that, I mean, you're weaving the movements together, but not just abstractly, concretely. So we want, to think about climate as a way of, lowering people's utility bills. People are getting gouged by private gas companies, right? I mean, the strategy starts coming into focus, I think, when you start trying to conceptualize things in that way. And to tie it to our earlier conversation, I think that the more these concrete goals actually give people a focus and help orient folks so that they can stick together during challenging times. I'm thinking, for example, about Occupy Wall Street, and some of you may have heard of the General Assembly, right? So people would come in this circle, and I'll speak, and a veteran, somebody from the global justice movement, she actually had sort of I don't know if it was a myth, but brought the people's mic to Occupy, and she said, this is going to work as long as people have something to do and decide together, right? As long as they're like figuring out the laundry or the logistics of the food. But when that focus ends, it's going to go off the fucking rails. And it did, right? Like when people have a concrete focus, I think it helps people interact as comrades and helps the emotional life of the group that we were speaking to in the first part of the discussion.
All right. Thank you so much. Wow. Big shout out to our colleagues and comrades.
Thanks, Chenjerai, our amazing host.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody, check
And our
this out.
interpreters. Can we give a hand for our interpreters?
Yes. Yes, our interpreters, Kanara and Patrice. Big shout out to them. Listen, I'm not sure how much longer we can be in here, but go hit up the Debt Collective table. Go hit up the book, the Haymarket table. And while you're online, get to know each other. There's some dope people in here that I'm seeing. Like, you know what I'm saying? I don't know. I'm going to have to pull y'all together and cook some chili so we can have some more time together. And for everybody else, I'll see y'all in the streets. See y'all down at One Police Plaza. You know how it is, how we do. All right, but much love, much respect, y'all. Thank you.